Welcome back to AM Northwest. The final book in his Hidden History series takes on the American dream and the future of the middle class. We welcome the author of over 30 books, including The Hidden History of the American Dream, radio talk show host and author Thom Hartmann. Great to have you with us.
Thank you.
The full title is The Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class and How to Rescue Our Future. That's a lot. What inspired this book? I understand it started with your parents and how they lived.
Yeah, well, that's kind of how I'm defining the middle class. It's my dad's story. When I was real young, my dad sold Rexair vacuum cleaners and World Book encyclopedias door to door, and we lived in a little tiny house that used to be a shed behind another house. And then he got a job at a tool and die shop and became a union machinist, and boom, we were in the middle class. He was able to buy a house, he was able to buy a new car, take a vacation every 2 years or every year, a new car every couple of years. He retired with a pension. I mean, that's kind of my definition of the middle, and put 4 boys through school. That's kind of my definition of the middle class, and so much of that has slipped away. When my generation, I'm a boomer, when my generation was in our 30s, we control 21% of the nation's wealth. Wow. The generation in their 30s right now controls 4.6% of the nation's wealth. So there's been this massive shift in what we used to call, the middle class. And now it takes a little over 2.3 salaries to full-time salaries to maintain the same lifestyle that a single paycheck, my dad's paycheck, could have in the 50s, 60s, 70s, and early 80s.
What led us to this point? What factors led us to this point here?
Well, it was the widespread embrace and frankly over a number of decades by both parties of what I call neoliberalism. It's a series of policies, let's do away with unions or reduce the density of unions. In 1980, about a third of us had union jobs, were union members, and which meant about 2/3 of us had the equivalent of a union salary because the union employers set the local wage floor. Today it's, I think it's a 10 or 11%. It's much lower, although it's starting to increase again now. Number one. Number two, free trade. We did away with tariff protections and a number of other policies. There was the Buy America Act that Franklin Roosevelt had passed that required the federal government to only buy from the United States. That changed in the 1980s. We started issuing all kinds of waivers. And so we started importing a lot of goods. And then, of course, we had things like NAFTA and whatnot. So during the from the 1980s, when we really embraced free trade up until, I think 2010 was the last stat I'd seen, we lost something like 15 million good jobs and 40,000 factories, went overseas. So, it's just been, and then on top of that, in the 1980s, the cost of college, 80% of the cost of college, roughly, was paid for by state and federal funds, and 20% was tuition. So we could afford to go to college. Yeah, I went to college and worked my way through working as a dishwasher at Bob's Big Boy and pumping gas at the Esso station across the street. Now, 80% of the cost of college, more or less, is paid for with tuition, and only 20% of state and federal funds. And so the result of that is that we've got a $2 trillion student debt crisis. We're the only developed country in the world that has that.
How did we end up with so many, we used to have small businesses everywhere. We don't have that anymore.
Yeah, in the mid-1980s, in 1983 specifically, the federal government basically stopped enforcing the Sherman Act and the Clayton Act. There's 3 antitrust laws that were passed between the 1880s and 1957. And the result of that was, and for people old enough to remember the 80s, there was this thing called the M&A frenzy, or the mergers and acquisitions. These guys called themselves masters of the universe, M&A artists, the movie Wall Street, about, and Michael Milken and all these guys. They were the big heroes. And what they were doing was they were buying up all these small companies, jamming them together into one giant company so that they could, if you had 20 smaller companies, you could get rid of, 19 of those bookkeepers. You could get rid of 19 of those, HR managers, et cetera, et cetera. And so it was all done in the name of efficiency. But the result was that now virtually every major industry in America is dominated by 3 to 5 companies. And the result of that is that they basically just can charge what they want, they can pay what they want.
And what led also to housing being so unaffordable?
It's gotten particularly bad recently, but and in large part because in 2008, 2009, during the housing crisis, that big crash, one of the big banks published a white paper saying this is a great opportunity for hedge funds and big banks, which up to that point had been really not in the real estate business. And now, and they jumped in with both feet. Now what we're seeing is, literally big New York hedge funds and New York banks coming into small town America and just buying up houses, but paying cash for them, buying up houses that would otherwise be available for people to buy, and flipping them into rental properties, and then using very sophisticated AI algorithms to jack the rent price up to the point where, where is that point where people stop paying, and squeezing as much as they can out of it. A lot of other countries deal with this by saying you can only own a certain number of houses, or foreign investors can't own houses in this country unless they live in them.
What is the solution to all of this?
Well, I think, we know how to make it work. We did this between 1932 and 1980, basically. We had this experiment where we had the fastest growing middle class in the history of the world. We went from around 15% of us in the middle class in 1933 to, in the mid-80s, about 65% of us in the middle class. Now we're down to 43 to 47% in the middle class, depending on whose numbers you use. So we just need to do what we did back then, back out of so-called free trade, start manufacturing things in America, and we're starting to do that now. And, the CHIPS Act, the Inflation Reduction Act, things like that really work in that direction. Get a handle on housing. Go back to investing in our young people's education, do away with student debt, and increase unionization so the workers can have a say in the workplace, and start breaking up these giant monopolies. It's pretty straightforward stuff.
Yeah, it is. Absolutely is. We want to tell everyone you have a book event, and it's tomorrow night at Powell's City of Books on West Burnside, 10th and West Burnside. We're going to put all the information for you on our website at KATU.com. The book, again, is titled The Hidden History of the American Dream, The Demise of the Middle Class, and How to Rescue Our Future. Thom Hartmann, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Helen.
All right, we'll be right back with more AM Northwest. Don't go away.